Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Ben and Ben's educational session. I'm your host, Ben,
I'm your other host, Ben.
and today we're going to be talking to you guys about sportsmanship.
The definition of sportsmanship is fair and generous behavior or treatment of others, especially in a sports contest. And sportsmanship relies heavily on the character of the people who are participating in the sports. It comes down to one's ethics, the amount of respect one has for the other competitor. And from there, we really learn the true colors of that person and that sport. And we get terms like sore losers from people not having sportsmanship after losing a game, or you have sore winners who win a game and they gloat about it. And sportsmanship is really the opposite of the win it all kind of culture where it's all about the it's all about the wins and not the game itself.
Sport identity is a little bit different than your normal thoughts of identity. A sport identity is something that you carry with you your entire life. Sports, especially in our culture today, are very impactful. They We like to think that the kind of sports that you play, not only as a kid but as you grow up through your schooling years, that it gives the world a window into what kind of a person you are. And I think that association that we have between the connection of sports and personality is that true sense of identity that we're pulling from the exterior world. And now a sport culture is going to be the cumulative amalgamation of everybody's experiences with that sport, coming together and forming this living, breathing community that exists outside of a single individual.
The more you know.
Socialization is the process by which people become familiar with and adapt themselves to the interpersonal relationships of their social world. Now, there's no better way for a child to be introduced to what they can and can't get away with, especially with their peers, than sport. It offers a structured environment for kids to test the limits of what's going on and plays a large part in their role of learning about themselves and their social identity, which Ben has more about.
So sports play, like Johnson was saying, has a large part in how kids start to adapt who they are and the roles that they have, not only within themselves but within the community around them. So that all develops in the play stage, right, Johnson?
Yeah. So the play stage is you're looking at your these are your young kids in your play stage, and they're just figuring out that a rules exist and can be a thing, and there are things that have constraints, but they are also allowing themselves to explore the systems in the roles of society, like playing doctor or house or whatever, those small games you played pretend with as a kid. But then as these kids grow up and they kind of master all of these little games, then there's some more. There's some competition that gets introduced. Right, Ben?
So the competition stage, as Johnson was saying, it really takes on a whole new world for them. Before, there was no real repercussions for going outside of what they were doing. They could be creative, they could do new stuff. The competition stage is where we start to tighten the reins a little bit and say, if you're going to compete, this is how you do it. And from there, we tell them, uh, you're playing here to win. That's the goal of this game, is to try and win. And kids start to develop more of a understanding of winning and losing and how that feels, and they get in touch with their emotions, and they also start to realize where they are compared to where everybody else is in that competition. You start to develop kind of a pecking order where you realize, hey, I may not be the strongest, but I may be the fastest, or I can't run the ball, but I can throw the ball. And they really start to understand where their strengths are personally, as well as their teams.
And throughout history, we've seen sports and a lack thereof sports really play a role in the development of gender roles in society. Traditionally, the men have been, are supposed to be the warriors and the builders and the hard laborers. So the men were generally traditionally pushed into sports as it was seen that competition in physicality would better prepare them for their lives in those professions. But now, as we're coming into a more modern age, we see females, thankfully, being encouraged to undertake the same paths that men have been taking for so long, just competing in these sports and having a blast. And it's a great thing to see the normalization of more and more females in sports, and the fact that the whole community is becoming a lot more open to things that would not have been as accepted 50 or 100 years ago. Um, but as far as socialization goes, it's extremely important for both of these parties to be able to experience levels of competition and play throughout their lives and be encouraged to be in those environments where they can better themselves and really understand where they're going to better fit into society. What's unfortunate about this is that generally, as the populations get older, we don't see as much participation in sporting opportunity, which Ben has a little bit to talk about.
It used to come from the fact that your body can't compete at high levels for forever. You see declines with all sorts of stuff, motor skills, strength, endurance, everything starts to decline. Now, there there's been a shift in this recently with developments of older teams and older leagues specifically for older adults. And you see this with running particularly, where you go to a marathon, there's classes, age classes, all the way up to over 60 I've seen. And so this is the same with a couple other sports like rugby. Our coach plays for a team called the Green Mountain Geezers, which is a team of 55 plus adults. So we are seeing a resurgence in participation of sport all the way to retirement plus age. All right, sport culture gives a sense of national community. It's been known to bring whole nations together with a single purpose of that sport. And you'll hear terms like baseball's as American as apple pie. And people really have this deep seated fond memory of sport growing up. And they also develop that as their identity for the country. Like everybody loves when America goes out and wins a couple gold medals. And everybody feels a sense of pride in not only what that sport is doing, but what that person's doing for their country in that sport.
Another great example of this national pride brought about by sport is you look no further than Wales and their attachment to rugby. Wales got started on the whole rugby thing back in the 1880s when it was brought over from England, and it was a large time of turmoil in the national identity of Wales. And in this time, rugby was really taken off, and it was like the early 19th century, and there's a lot of immigrants coming into Wales at this time. And as a result, all of these working class immigrants started to pick up the game, and before you knew it, it was as widespread as American baseball was in America. And so, just like America developed this fondness for baseball, Wales has developed this national pride for their rugby competition.
There's been terms thrown around about very important games at key moments in history. and they're called Patriot Games. And that includes just the underlying tension of politics and war and just a lot of overarching things coming together in the epitome of one single game. Uh, this goes all the way back to 1896. There was a team of Japanese schoolboys who defeated a team of Americans in baseball. And for the first time ever, people in Japan realized, hey, we can do this too. And from there, it began a large just resurgence in sport, and also baseball just took off because no longer was there this American stereotype of us being so much better and stronger than the Japanese in terms of baseball. They really realized that they can do this too, and it brought the whole country together in that. The same thing happened in 1932 with a cricket game between England and Australia. So the English had forever been using this kind of posh technique where they threw elegantly, and they were very sportsman about it and had a love for like the history of that stuff. And the Australians came in and they were kind of rough and rowdy when it came to that cricket match, and they started implementing some new like violent and just heavy hitting tactics and completely upended the British. And from then on, people realized Australia can really do this. They can win, and if they set their mind to it, they can be a lot better in what they want to be, and no longer were they just constantly bombarded by the British.
Right. And what's really interesting is what these games represent on a national identity / cultural level. We see now Japan has a huge culture that's revolving around baseball. Like baseball just took off in Japan. I'm sure, I don't know exactly, but cricket is huge in England, and I would imagine that Australia is not one to abandon its roots, and I can imagine that cricket's also huge there. But what these games carry an even larger significance. It's a representative power of the nations behind them. This is why the Olympics are such a big event consistently. Um, because we get to see the best of these nations come out and fight and pit against each other in physical competition, mano a mano, to see really who is the best and who has the best people and what that means. And you can see the weight that this is carried and the level of these competitions is carried. I mean, even today with the recent Russian ban from the Olympics, because they were consistently breaking the rules, the anti-juicing rules, which is ridiculous. And this just goes to demonstrate this level of competition that we have reached the pinnacle, where the point has come where you almost cannot be on top without trying to cheat in some way. And when this much power and this much, I dare say, national clout hangs in the balance, then everyone's going to be trying to claw for some kind of advantage, because they understand that the deep-rooted psychological nature that these sports can rouse out of people is so powerful.
And nothing does that quite like the Nazi Olympics. We've heard this growing up. Hitler has the Olympics there. He's supposed to be the better race. He's supposed to be superior. That's all they can talk about. And America comes over with Jesse Owens and just completely sweeps the Olympics. And that just undermined all of the things that he was trying to do over there. And that really did tick him off. But that spoke volumes to all the people watching and hearing how the Nazi Party's starting to take over, and they believe that they're superior to everybody else. And then to just watch them get humiliated like that really helped put some people at ease, and also kind of shifted the tides of some people's thinking, where they were like, hey, maybe we can't say we are the superior race. Maybe we can't say that the Aryans are so much better. And it really kind of, it took the wind out of his sails for a little while, and that was huge at the time.
Yeah, you can't step out into the Olympic scene and then get bodied and then just walk away with an unscratched ego. I mean, even if you're Hitler, no one's untouchable. Okay, now we're rolling.
Okay. So soccer has been around for literally hundreds of years. There was signs of soccer being played during Roman occupancy of England in the 14th and 15th century. So for years and years, that's been its own thing. But as it was picked up by other people, there were localized versions called folk football, which was more of a prison prison rule style, where it was no rules and it was played by large teams. And initially, it was just modified by dribbling the ball, and then they moved to picking up the ball and just running with it. And that was promoted in Cheltenham and Marlborough in Britain for years. And then they developed a rugby school where a lot of young men came to play, and they sort of developed some rules and established some sort of fluidity to the game. And the game really sprouted into a lot more of it, where it became a sign of like manliness, and the guys who played rugby were a lot tougher and more brutal than the guys who played soccer at the time. And they believed that it instilled a muscular Christian gentleman the values of unselfishness, fearlessness, teamwork, and self-control. And as it sprouted up locally, a lot of larger schools started to pick it up, and clubs started to pick it up. Oxford and Cambridge institutionalized rugby first. But once they left school, the young men continued to play and started even more clubs outside of that. So during about 1854, the University of Dublin, adopted rugby as an official sport. And from there, we see it being played at the college level. And from the very beginning, there was some backlash and some disputes over what should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed, because it was a very brutal, just boyish sport where kids would sometimes trip each other. You would kick the other team in the shins to try and get them to fall over with the ball. And so as it got picked up by larger entities, they started putting more and more rules in place to try and cut down on the unsportsmanlike conduct. From there, they developed into larger leagues and started the Football Association. And rugby was left out of the original document for the Football Association. So they had to develop by themselves. And in 1871, they formed a Rugby Football Union, the RFU that we see today.
Rugby holds a unique position in today's sporting world. I think rugby is one of the, I would say, almost untouched sports from commercialization, at least here in the United States. Rugby has not really taken off on a whole national scale. I certainly didn't know about rugby until I took a postgraduate year and I found out there was a team, and I joined up, and I have never played a more fun and mentally and physically fulfilling team sport than rugby. And the people that I have met in this sport have been unlike the people I have met in any other sporting environment. Just from the sheer level of character that these people possess. Now, granted, there are some idiots, but you're going to get that across the board. But what really stands out about the whole rugby sports culture to me, from being in the, at least compared to a football uh, standpoint, because that was the only team sport that I participated in previously, it was very interesting because there was a lot more respect, respect for oneself, respect for the refs, respect for the game, and there wasn't a, a huge emphasis on winning, which I think comes from rugby's unique stance in United States culture. It's struggling to catch on. It's struggling to keep its spot, and it's a very small, concentrated group of people that really love it that are keeping it alive. And I think that because it's struggling, that people just appreciate the fact that they can play. And I think the fact that people are appreciating that enjoyment on just a basic level that they can play really separates out that need to win at all costs mentality. And I think it's the absence of this mentality that's present in a lot of other sports in the United States that really is what makes the game like feel so viscerally and emotionally different when you're competing than in other sports.
Yeah, and as you touched upon, just in the rules, even rugby holds you to a higher standard where you have to conduct yourself in a very sportsmanlike manner, where only the captains can talk to the refs, and they have to, every time they talk to him, they have to refer to him as sir. And from the very core of this all the way up, you see just a continued respect for yourself, your teammates, the referees, and your opponents. And that comes from the sport that started grassroots, like we were saying, but has split to both the northern and southern hemisphere. It's been around even in America since, I believe, 1874. Harvard, uh, they began having a team, and so did Yale, Princeton, Columbia. All the big Ivy League schools embraced the sport because of the codes that it had. It wasn't like the hard nosed, rough football that we heard of at the time. Rugby is a hooligan's game played by gentlemen, is what Winston Churchill said. So the evolution of sport is a multifaceted thing where uh, sports have evolved within themselves with new rule changes to make it safer, to make it more enjoyable, and to make the game flow better so that it's easier to play and watch. It's also developed locally where some people have certain styles that they play. You see this with different styles of offensive formations for football, like shotgun, that was developed in the South. You see also a evolution in who plays the sport. I think it's interesting to mention that as we've played sports for longer, positions become specialized. People really start to figure out these guys fit. And you start at such a young age and you practice so hard so that you can go on to playing the sport better than anybody else has. And when they started this study in 1974, the average rugby player was 5'10", 185 pounds. And in that time, the next result I have is from 2014, where we found that bigger, more aggressive players can really dominate the sport. So now the average in the league is 6'2", 216 pounds. And the same is kind of across the board with all of the other sports. People have adapted to those conditions and have pushed themselves harder and harder every year, because no longer are you a guy who just plays the sport on the side. You're an athlete. You're That's your identity. That's what you have trained to do. The average sumo wrestler in 1974 was 5'11" ish, and he was 373 pounds. Well, that's dwarfed in comparison to the modern day athletes who were 6'4", 342 pounds. But that's coming down still, because in the 90s we saw the average was 6'8", 510 pounds. Now, since then, we've realized those large players have problems and it's not sustainable for a while. So we have seen an evolution of getting larger and then coming back down to a more reasonable, more sustainable average.
We've seen sport evolution affect the competitive scene quite a bit, as the competitive scene of sports has been realized, especially in this modernized, globalized world where everything is connected. We've really created a platform where never before in history has the focus and importance of sport been so easily delivered and has become relevant to everybody on the planet. Um, but you see that the influence that the competitive high level of sport has had on the more novice level of play has not been all that great. We've seen that the examples that are constantly being set, like the Michael Phelps, the Alex Honnold, the Michael Jordan, these are all athletes performing at their peak of human physiological achievement. And to have, it's almost like the condition that we see with people comparing themselves to, supermodels on social media. Yeah, there are these unattainable levels of achievement that are just unrealistic to uphold yourself to, and detrimental to uphold yourself to. And we see that these lower levels of competition are trying to be the pros, and they're trying to be the best that they can be. And no one can fault them for attempting to improve themselves. But when it comes for the detriment of the recreational leagues, and it starts to take away the fun that people are having from it because they can't look past the competitive aspect, then I think you're really going to have a problem. And I think on some level, sports and sport culture in our society has become lost.
So now the modernization of sport has really gotten crazy. I know I have Bleacher Report, which is an app, and I get bombarded, especially right now, with stuff about the NFL draft. And people are so in tune with what these teams are doing. And it's really developed this huge culture where you have to be constantly paying attention if you want to be a super fan, where you know where everything's going on. And the sports have gotten so huge, as Johnson was saying. You're seeing the development of these freaks of nature. Like, as somebody who likes to lift and thinks it would be cool to participate in some like strongman competitions, I'm 6'1", 280. And I look at the people who are competing competitively at this point are leaps and bounds further than I think I could get. Because like Hafthor from Iceland, uh, he weighs 440 pounds and is 6'9", and he has a six pack. And they call him the mountain because he really is a mountain of a man. And you see these pockets of super competitive, super athletic people developing all across the nation. Brazil is known to put out crazy good soccer players. Iceland is known for their strongmen. New Zealand and Wales are respectively known for their rugby players. And America is coming out with top swimmers, top baseball players, uh, just top athletes, period. And we see the same thing in Russia and other places. Pennsylvania is known for our NFL players. We have some of the most drafted NFL players in the world.
And as sport has become more relevant in everybody's lives, companies have, like Hulu, have taken notice of this. And the rapid commercialization of sports has been occurring ever since, radio was a thing. Ever since you could sell an ad over a radio sports game, then it's been a game changer for companies because like we were saying earlier, sports have a place in national identity, and it's very rare that you get a medium by which you can reach out to so many people, and as a result, we see massive amounts of cash flow going into the sporting industry, even if it is just revenue for advertisement or whatever. But even the sports industries as have themselves selling merchandising or any sort of money making tactics of the sort are really going to um, optimize the competitive landscape in a way that's not conducive to the sportsman-like, fun-having, yet competitive environment that was so present in the past before all of this commercialization. Um,
So, with this commercialization, this broad reaching thing of sport comes, why be fair when you can just win? So, with this, for the first time recently, for the first time in sports culture, we've really seen teams cheating, teams doping. You have the whole blood doping scandal of competitive bike riding, where players are willing to remove some of their blood, store it, put it back in their body right before competition to give them that extra oxygen that they need to really just blast everybody else in the competition. You see steroid use in baseball earlier, and you just see all these guys trying to get an unnatural edge that we haven't really had to deal with before, and now we have to take all these countermeasures to try and stop it. The UFC does super strict testing where they can find pectometers of or pectomilligrams of banned or illegal substances in these players' bodies, where if you had something 6 months ago, they can detect that you were on something. And that hasn't been precedented in sport till now.
Unfortunately, we've seen the rise of all of these less, let's say, gentlemanly tactics because of the weight that we've put on success inadvertently by associating it with money. One of the things that I saw when I was doing research for this project was that there was a quote, and the quote was, "First place didn't always used to mean commercial deals," and I think that speaks volumes about what the state of the industry is in and what that means about the quality of competition that we're getting. I say that the quality of competition has decreased because it is less genuine now than it used to be. I say that due to all of the scraping, the bottom of the barrel for the tiniest edge has just gotten old, and it's honestly turned people off from the sport or from any sport. It has the ability to do that. It just
We
puts a bad taste in your mouth.
we really see this with juicing in Russia and how Russia has been, yes, putting up some very good athletes in the Olympics. But again and again, we hear about how they've been caught juicing or using other banned substances to get to that edge to be there. And it's kind of a shame because they're really losing track of what sport is, the competition, and how it is supposed to be a fair competition. Like I said with the sportsmanship of earlier, you lose track of why you're doing it when all you want is winning, because winning equals money. And you see a lack in how people conduct themselves at these large sporting events. And it's really taken sport by storm, especially in the MMA world, where people are trying to cut all this weight to get into a lower weight class because they believe that they can dominate even more in that weight class, instead of, hey, I walk around at 180, I should fight it at 180 because I know I'm comfortable here. They think, hey, if I lose 20 pounds, I could fight in the 155 and I could really tear it up down there. And people have just really become out of touch with why we're doing it in a healthy manner and what we should be doing. So in this video brought to you by the BBC, we're going to follow Dean, who's an MMA fighter, and he's going to try and lose 7 kgs before a fight. And a kilogram, 7 kilograms equals about 15 pounds. So he's shedding all of this body weight, primarily water weight, and he's going to severely dehydrate himself just to make this weight class and try and rebound as much as possible to get into the match feeling better than when he was at weigh-ins. And we've seen this time and time again with big names in the sport. Conor McGregor was known for cutting weight sometimes and showing up ghost white pale, barely holding himself up to these weigh-ins just to try and get that competitive edge in a weight class that he feels he can dominate in. So, Ben, you mind playing the video?
There you go. We'll full screen it for you.
Bet.
At home.
So, yeah, nil by mouth now. Everything that I expel from the body now, whether it's urine, fecal matter, sweat, anything that comes off me is weight lost.
It's a decent size, this, to be honest.
Most I can weigh in out of 61.8 kilograms.
The way I see it is, each time I fill that, I'm a kilo lighter.
If it was to be coming off slow, then there would be no sleep tonight. I would just soldier on and get it done. It's got to be done. Otherwise, the fight's not going to happen in my eyes. So, it's a must.
Yang Jianbing was only 21 years old, and he unfortunately died as a result of his weight cut. And the autopsy report suggested that it was a heart attack, basically.
Eager forms to cool down in between. Worst case scenario is he's going to end up with heat exhaustion or something like that. And obviously, very worst case scenario, ultimately that could be fatal. It's a tough ordeal for him to put his body through. Even the guys who are used to being around him when he does it, they don't enjoy the experience, because at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's one of their friends, it's somebody that they love, and to see them get put through that, it's not easy to watch.
So as you saw in the video, these MMA fighters are putting themselves through, you know, they're literally killing themselves, losing this weight for the competition. Instead of just settling at a lower normal body weight, they're hanging on to that competitive edge so harshly that to lose all of the weight to actually qualify for the competition, they're putting themselves at risk of death, which is ridiculous. It's ridiculous that it's honestly that it's A, come to this, and B, that this is still an acknowledged behavior that is allowed and not being mitigated against on some kind of managerial level, especially with the resources that the MMA has. The MMA is one of the biggest sporting engines of industry in the United States, and they more than have the power to be able to put a stop to this horrible behavior that's come around from the optimization of winning. Because especially in these individual sports like MMA, we see the winners are the ones with all the deals and all of the money and the success. But the people who come in, they lose a couple fights, win a couple fights here and there, whatever, they're not going to make it as big. It's really forced people into this make it or break it attitude where they're willing to put themselves through these horrible gauntlets to even attempt to have a shot at that success.
So, as Johnson was saying, it is a $4 billion with a B dollar league, and their response to all these people cutting weight, and then previously you would just get a saline injection where you'd sit there and get dripped saline to try and rehydrate after your weight cuts. They've done away with that. They said you can't drip to get your hydration back up in order to fight. And I know at a high school level for wrestling, we had to do a hydration test at the beginning of the season to show that we were adequately hydrated and we weren't cutting then to make weights. But that was only done at the beginning of the season. From then on, players could cut weight and get themselves in pretty bad spots to try and make those weights. I knew a kid who would, before the season, his walking weight was 210. And every year he would wrestle at 180. So around wrestling season, he would stop eating. He would have water and coffee and maybe a salad during the day. And he would just start using chewing tobacco, so he would be spitting out all of the water he could get out of his system. He would run around in trash bags, which was banned as long as they don't see you doing it. And it's just developed this really gnarly culture surrounding it. And that's where we're coming in and saying something has to change, because sport isn't going anywhere, and it never really has. It's always been a huge part of people's history, their self-identity, at national levels even. So we're saying we need to reevaluate what we're doing as nations, competitors, parents, coaches, and we need to develop these really positive working and playing cultures that have sustained just like rugby. We need to see a complete rehaul in the way we think and the way we play.
Exactly. And that was so well said, Ben. Really summed up our last points. We're going to hop over to the works cited now so you can see it. There it is. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you lending your ears and your eyes to us for an extensive amount of time to learn about our topic. I hope you guys all enjoyed. This has been your host, Ben, and your other host,
Ben.
And this is us signing off. Have a good day. Thank you.